I was fixing a leaky faucet when I heard her voice from the kitchen. She was on her phone, speaking softly, almost gleeful. "Once the divorce is final, I'll get half." The line was on speaker. She didn't realize I could hear every word. My hands froze under the running water, the wrench clattering against the porcelain sink as my heart dropped, not with a sudden shock, but a slow, heavy descent. 28 years of marriage, a lifetime of shared memories and whispered promises, all reduced to a cold, calculated transaction. Instead of the rage I might have felt in my younger days, I felt something far colder, something that cut deeper. Absolute, stark clarity. I remained still, listening to the drip of water, until her conversation ended. That night, I smiled at her across the dinner table like nothing had happened, complimented her cooking, and even kissed her goodnight as if it were any other evening. But in my head, behind the facade of a loving husband, the gears had already begun to turn, slowly, deliberately. She had no idea the man she betrayed had just started planning her undoing. This was just the beginning. Just before you continue to watch, please subscribe to this channel and like this video. It would encourage and help us keep creating amazing content for you. Alright, back to the story. The next morning, I brought her coffee in bed. Extra cream, just how she likes it. The aroma filled the room, a familiar comfort that now felt like a cruel deception. She didn't suspect a thing, murmuring a sleepy thank you. I kissed her forehead, a final, silent farewell to the man I used to be and the life I thought we had. Then I drove to work like always, the early morning traffic a blur outside my window. My mind wasn't on clients or construction projects anymore. It was entirely consumed by a new, intricate blueprint. How to systematically dismantle my life, on paper at least, protecting what I had built. If she wanted half, I'd make sure what she thought I owned was worth exactly that, half of nothing. It wasn't about malice, it was about self-preservation. But first, I needed trusted allies, people who understood discretion, for this was not a battle to be fought openly. My first call wasn't to a lawyer, that would come later. It was to Mark, my accountant, a man I'd known and trusted for over 20 years. And that single phone call, made from the quiet sanctuary of my office, would change everything. When I laid out my plan to Mark, his usually calm, composed face registered a mix of awe and terror. He listened patiently, taking notes, occasionally rubbing his chin. He warned me it would take considerable time and surgical precision. One wrong move, one misplaced document, one overheard conversation, and everything could be exposed, my carefully constructed defense crumbling before it even began. "We'd have to start with my company," he explained, the construction business I had poured my life into, slowly and subtly shifting assets out of my direct name, creating layers of legal protection. I told him not to rush. I had been patient for 28 years with her. I could be patient for a few more months with this. He asked what my wife had done, his voice soft, almost sympathetic. I just looked at him and said, "She stopped being my partner the moment she started planning her profit." He nodded slowly, a silent understanding passing between us. And that was the day the operation began, a quiet war waged on paper, meticulously executed. By the time she realized it, if she ever did, I'd be a ghost on paper, utterly untouchable. At home, I became the perfect, almost overly affectionate husband. It was a performance, Oscar-worthy in its dedication. She probably thought I was trying to fix our marriage, trying to recapture the spark, maybe even make up for some imagined failing on my part. She wasn't entirely wrong. I was trying to fix my marriage, just not in the way she imagined. I cooked her favorite dinners, planned thoughtful date nights at restaurants we hadn't visited in years, and even surprised her with flowers, a gesture I hadn't made consistently in a long time. All the while, during long lunch breaks, I was secretly meeting with my lawyer, John, and a family trust specialist, Maria. We were meticulously working to shift the ownership of my business, my properties, and even my personal accounts into an irrevocable family trust, safely nestled under my daughter, Emily's, name. Each signature I placed on those complex legal documents felt like a quiet, defiant act of survival, a reclaiming of my future. And she, oblivious and self-assured, kept smiling, believing she had me wrapped around her finger, that my sudden affection was a sign of her power. She didn't know every "I love you" was part of her own setup, every kiss a silent move on my chessboard. My daughter, Emily, a smart and perceptive young woman of 25, noticed something was off, despite my best efforts to keep up appearances. One evening, as we were washing dishes, she paused, looking at me with a worried frown. She asked if Mom was okay, saying she'd been on her phone more than usual lately, often taking calls in hushed tones behind closed doors. I gave her a reassuring, if slightly hollow, smile and told her not to worry, that her mom was just handling things, implying some benign social or family matter. What I didn't say, what I couldn't yet reveal, was the immense burden I had placed upon her shoulders, albeit unknowingly. My daughter was now, on paper, the legal owner of my entire company, the trust's sole beneficiary. It was a strange, almost surreal paradox. The woman I had married, the one who shared my bed, was actively plotting to lie and deceive me, while my own child, completely innocent and unaware, had unknowingly become my most powerful shield. I remember telling John, my lawyer, during one of our discreet meetings, "She can't touch what isn't mine." He simply smirked, a knowing glint in his eye. "Then you're already winning," he confirmed. But even as I felt a flicker of triumph, I had a nagging suspicion that my wife was about to make her first truly careless mistake. My suspicion proved correct sooner than I anticipated. One Tuesday evening, I walked into the bedroom to find my wife rummaging through her purse, looking for something. She quickly zipped it up and left for her usual book club. Once she was gone, I felt a strange compulsion to check. Call it instinct, or just the deep-seated mistrust that now clouded my heart. Tucked deep beneath a pile of old receipts and a half-empty lipstick, I found it. A second phone, a cheap burner model, clearly not her main device. It was unsettling, like finding a stranger's diary. I didn't open it. I didn't need to see the messages or hear the calls. The mere existence of it was proof enough of her deceit, a tangible piece of her secret life. Instead, I carefully took a picture of it with my own phone, making sure the timestamp was visible. Then, with a steady hand, I left it exactly where I found it, disturbing nothing. By morning, when I glanced at her purse on the dresser, the second phone was gone, vanished as if it had never been there. And when she smiled at me over her coffee at breakfast, asking me about my day, I knew she thought she'd gotten away with something, that her secret was safe. She had no idea I was already 10 steps ahead, holding a silent piece of evidence that would shatter her carefully constructed illusion. With the evidence of her second phone tucked away in my mind, I started planting the seeds of another illusion. I began talking casually, and with a carefully rehearsed sigh, about downsizing the company, lamenting how business was unexpectedly bad this quarter, how contracts were getting harder to land. She listened with a practiced sympathy, patting my arm, but I could almost see the gears turning in her head, secretly calculating what this fabricated decline would mean for her half of my supposedly dwindling assets. I played my part perfectly, sighing dramatically over old invoices, making fake, hushed phone calls from the garage where I'd pretend to discuss difficult financial decisions. Meanwhile, in the real world, Mark and I were busy moving the last of our significant liquid assets, converting them into non-liquid forms or transferring them into the secure, untouchable family trust. One evening, she even started suggesting, with a false air of helpfulness, that we should sell one of the company trucks before it loses too much value. That was her greed, pure and unadulterated, showing through her thin veil of concern. I simply nodded, agreeing in principle, and noted every single word. The trap was almost ready, meticulously laid with her own avarice, and she was about to walk straight into it, completely blind to the wires she was tripping. My accountant, Mark, proved to be a master of his craft. He helped me set up a small, discreet side account, a meticulously crafted decoy. It was designed to look exactly like my secret stash, the kind of money a man might hide from his wife, just in case she ever decided to go digging. I transferred exactly $20,000 into it, just enough to be significant, but not so much as to raise alarm, perfectly calibrated to distract her. I then made sure to mention it casually during a fabricated argument about finances, letting the words slip as if by accident, quickly regretting them. Maybe I should have just kept more for myself, I mumbled, knowing she was listening intently. 2 weeks later, she subtly brought up that same amount, pretending it was just curiosity about an old investment statement she'd supposedly found. I confirmed her suspicion with a reluctant, sheepish smile, pretending I'd been caught. In that moment, watching her satisfied expression, I knew exactly where her loyalty ended and her self-interest began. It wasn't about the money for me anymore. It was about the principle. And soon, very soon, she'd reveal just how deep her betrayal truly went, unknowingly exposing her true nature for all to see. The next piece of her deceit came from an unexpected source. Our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, a kind, older lady who always meant well but rarely filtered her thoughts, stopped me while I was getting the mail. She mentioned she'd seen my wife having lunch at the new cafe in town with a younger man. She quickly added, "Oh, but I'm sure it was just a business meeting." I brushed it off with a casual laugh, pretending I didn't care, that it was perfectly normal. But that night, when she was in the shower, I discreetly checked her calendar app on her iPad. There it was, the same day, same time, simply marked consultation. She was careful, meticulous even, but not quite careful enough to hide everything from a man who was now watching her every move. I didn't confront her about it. There was no need for a messy scene. Because now I knew. She wasn't just planning to take my money and walk away. She was already actively replacing me, building a new life even before she'd finished dismantling mine. And that discovery, though painful, hardened my resolve beyond any hope of return, solidifying my decision to see this through to its calculated end. My lawyer, John, called me early one morning, his voice cautious. He informed me that her side had been making quiet, almost imperceptible inquiries, mostly about my personal finances and the structure of my business. It was clear she was preparing the divorce, gathering her forces, getting ready to strike. I asked him what would happen if she filed the very next day, if all her preparations were to culminate in that moment. He paused, then said, "You'd walk away with your peace, Nathan." She'd walk away empty, with nothing but the clothes on her back, metaphorically speaking. That was all I needed to hear. The trust was solid, the assets secured. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I wanted her to reveal her true colors, to show her hand completely, before I finally left. I needed her to believe, even for a fleeting moment, that she was truly winning, that her elaborate scheme had worked perfectly. And I knew exactly how to make that happen, how to lure her into the final, decisive move that would seal her fate. Our anniversary was approaching, a date etched into my memory, but one she hadn't mentioned once. It was a clear omission, another sign of her detachment. So, I took the initiative. I made plans, a reservation at our favorite upscale restaurant, a bottle of expensive champagne, and a little surprise. Halfway through the meal, after we'd toasted to many more years, a bitter irony only I appreciated, I subtly steered the conversation toward financial security and the uncertain future of my business, feigning worry. Her tone changed instantly. The warm, affectionate facade melted away, replaced by something defensive, sharp, almost predatory. She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't need to worry, Nathan," she said, her voice laced with an almost imperceptible edge. "I'll get my share, no matter what happens to the company." I smiled across the table, a perfectly innocent, bewildered expression on my face, pretending to misunderstand her implication, letting her believe I was oblivious. The raw, unfiltered greed in her eyes, however fleeting, confirmed everything I needed to know. I'd just watched the woman I once loved confess her true intentions, her profound self-interest, without her even realizing she'd done so. After that anniversary dinner, there was no turning back. I made a quiet, final appointment with John, my lawyer, the very next morning. Together, we meticulously finalized the last of the trust documents, ensuring every detail was irreversible, airtight, and completely compliant with every legal stipulation. Every remaining asset, from the company's fleet of vehicles to the last piece of business inventory, from our vacation home to even the antique grandfather clock in our living room, now legally belonged to Emily's irrevocable family trust. I signed the last page, the ink a dark, definitive mark on my old life, and exhaled for the first time in weeks, a deep, cleansing breath that seemed to carry away months of tension. John looked at me, a respectful nod in his eyes. "Congratulations, Nathan," he said softly. "You're a free man, living in plain sight." That night, I slept beside her, the familiar rhythm of her breathing a stark contrast to the quiet revolution I had orchestrated. I knew, with absolute certainty, that she could no longer touch a single cent of what she believed was hers. And yet, she still thought she was in control, still believed her grand scheme was unfolding perfectly. The stage was set for her downfall. She just didn't know it yet. The days that followed were a strange mixture of calm and simmering anticipation. She became unusually affectionate, almost overly so. She'd bring me coffee in the mornings without being asked, cook my favorite meals, and even suggested we spend more time together on the weekends. For a fleeting second, a sliver of doubt, I wondered if guilt had somehow caught up to her, if perhaps she was having second thoughts about her plans for divorce. But then, a quick, discreet check of her phone bill, a habit I had reluctantly developed, revealed a pattern of new numbers, local, frequent, and often late-night calls. Whatever game she was playing, whatever final preparations she was making, it was clearly nearing its calculated end. My gut told me to let her make the very next move, to allow her the illusion of control until the very last moment. Because once she did, once she initiated the final act of her betrayal, everything would collapse around her, for her, not for me. I stood firm, ready for the inevitable impact, bracing myself for the storm she was about to unleash. The storm arrived, as predicted. She came home late one evening, a strong, unfamiliar perfume clinging to her clothes, her voice carefully rehearsed, almost too steady. She sat me down on the sofa, her hands clasped in her lap, her eyes glistening with a hint of manufactured tears, ready for their cue. "Nathan," she began softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I think we've grown apart. We're just not the same people we used to be." It was almost beautiful, her performance, the delicate phrasing, the melancholic tone, the subtle tremble in her lip. An outsider might have believed her heartbroken. I simply nodded, maintaining my facade of a bewildered, saddened husband. I told her I understood, that I had felt it too, and gently suggested she go rest, that we could talk more in the morning. Inside, however, I could barely hold back a silent, bitter laugh. The irony of her carefully crafted speech, delivered to a man who already knew her every move, was almost too much to bear. Because I knew, with chilling certainty, what tomorrow would bring. Tomorrow, she'd make her fatal move, the one she believed would finally secure her future, but would instead unravel her entire world. True to my prediction, the next morning, she presented me with a manila envelope. Her hand trembled slightly as she held it out, her expression a careful mixture of sorrow and resolve. She said, her voice barely audible, "Nathan, I truly didn't want it to come to this. I tried, I really did." I took the envelope from her, the heavy paper feeling strangely cold in my hand. I opened it slowly, deliberately, revealing the official documents within, divorce papers, already signed by her, her signature a flourish of finality. I looked at her, and with a genuine sincerity that surprised even myself, I thanked her. "Thank you, Martha," I said softly, "for everything." Her confusion was palpable, almost satisfying. She had expected anger, tears, a desperate plea perhaps, but not gratitude. She didn't realize she had just triggered the final, decisive checkmate I'd been building for months, a silent, intricate trap laid with patience and precision. And I couldn't wait to see her face, to witness the dawning realization, when she finally discovered the true implications of the papers she had just served. Because what came next would destroy her plan completely, leaving her with absolutely nothing. 3 agonizing days later, the phone call came. It was her lawyer, a notoriously aggressive man named Mr. Peterson. His voice, usually dripping with practiced confidence, held a thinly veiled smugness as he informed me they'd be seeking half of all marital assets, as was her right. "My client has been meticulously documenting everything, Mr. Miller," he declared, as if reciting a triumphant decree. I chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Sure, Mr. Peterson. Go right ahead. Have your team run the numbers. Do your due diligence." There was a noticeable hesitation on his end, a brief, unsettling silence. Then, his tone shifted, a hint of unease creeping into his voice. "Wait, Mr. Miller," he said, his arrogance faltering. "Are you saying you don't own the construction company anymore? We're seeing some unusual filings." I leaned back in my office chair, a quiet smile spreading across my face. That's correct, Mr. Peterson, I replied, my voice calm and steady. Nope. Haven't for months, actually. Everything's in a family trust now. Completely legally transferred. Irrevocable. And with that, I politely said goodbye and hung up smiling. The silence on the other end, the sudden, stunned void where his smug confidence had been, was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard, a symphony of his dawning realization. By the weekend, the panic on her side was a tangible thing. She called me repeatedly, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly frantic, her carefully composed facade crumbling rapidly. She tried 3 different divorce lawyers in less than 24 hours, each call an act of desperation. Every single one of them, I later learned through a discreet conversation with John, told her the exact same thing. The family trust was legally airtight, meticulously constructed, and absolutely unassailable. There were no loopholes, no hidden clauses she could exploit. She stormed into my empty office at the construction yard on Monday morning, her face a contorted mask of fury and betrayal. "You tricked me, Nathan," she screamed, her voice echoing off the corrugated iron walls. "You made me think you still owned everything." I stood calmly, looking out the dusty window, my back to her. "No, Martha," I replied, my voice steady, devoid of anger or triumph. "You tricked yourself. You let your greed blind you to the truth." For once, she had no comeback, no clever retort, no rehearsed argument. She just stood there, speechless, defeated. And in that heavy silence, amidst the dust and tools of my life's work, I finally found my peace. But the fallout, I knew, was only just getting started. As news of the divorce spread, she tried desperately to turn our mutual friends against me. She called them, crying hysterically, weaving elaborate tales about how I had hidden money and betrayed her after years of marriage. She painted herself as the unsuspecting victim, cruelly manipulated by a vindictive husband. But I had proof, quiet and devastating. I had her phone records, confirming her late-night calls to other numbers, the picture of her secret burner phone, the calendar entries for her consultations. I even had a discreet video I'd taken of her lunch date with a younger man, captured from my car across the street. I didn't share any of it publicly. I didn't have to. People, especially those who had known us both for years, can tell when a story doesn't quite add up, when the desperation in a voice rings false. By the next week, the tables had turned. She was the one everyone subtly avoided at social gatherings, the one whose calls went unanswered. And I, the quiet guy who had always just worked hard and stayed out of drama, was now simply the quiet guy who finally had enough. Still, one thing she let slip in a public rant at the grocery store caught my attention. A desperate, venomous comment that hinted at a deeper, darker secret, and it changed everything, pushing me to revisit her past. The guilt I didn't expect to feel settled over me like a fine dust, covering the edges of my quiet triumph. I thought victory would taste sweeter, more absolute. But seeing her unravel, witnessing her fear and raw anger and the slow, public humiliation she inflicted upon herself, it stirred something within me. Not pity, exactly. She had brought this upon herself, after all, but a profound sense of exhaustion. It wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was about the destruction of a shared history, of something I had once believed in with all my heart. I realized that true revenge, at my age, isn't about celebration or reveling in someone else's pain. It's about closure. It's about severing the last ties, cleaning the slate, and freeing yourself from the bitterness. I already had mine. My assets were safe, my future secured. But closure, I was about to learn, has a price beyond just financial assets. It demands an emotional toll, a deep introspection into the past, and I was about to feel the weight of it, revisiting the archives of our shared life to understand the true cost of her ambition. We met in court one last time, a sterile, impersonal room that felt a million miles away from the home we had shared. She sat on one side, her lawyer looking haggard and defeated. I sat on the other, John by my side, calm and ready. Her lawyer spoke with desperation, trying every legal maneuver, every emotional appeal, to pry open the impenetrable trust. Mine barely said a word, simply presented the documents, clean and undeniable. The judge, a stoic woman with tired eyes, reviewed the meticulously prepared papers, then looked directly at Martha. "Ms. Miller," she said flatly, her voice devoid of emotion. "Your husband, Mr. Miller, legally doesn't own any marital assets that fall under community property distribution. All his prior assets were legally transferred to an irrevocable family trust months ago." Martha's face, which had been pale, turned a sickly white. The realization, stark and absolute, hit her like a physical blow. It was over in minutes. The judge granted the divorce, dismissed her claims, and gavelled us into separate lives. I walked out into the cold air of late autumn, finally, truly free at last. But freedom, I discovered, has a strange and echoing silence, and it followed me home, a hollow space where a long-shared life used to be. Weeks later, after the dust of the divorce had settled and the legal papers were mere memories, she called me. Her voice, once so full of calculated charm or feigned distress, was now simply quiet, almost fragile. She said she just wanted to talk, to understand, to gain some closure. Despite the exhaustion and the deep hurt, a part of me, the part that had once loved her, agreed. We met at a small, unassuming diner on the outskirts of town, a neutral territory far from the ghost of our old life. She looked older, noticeably thinner, her eyes shadowed with defeat. She asked if I had ever truly loved her, a question that hung heavy in the air between us. I met her gaze, unflinching. "Yes, Martha," I said softly, honestly. "I did. Very much. But the woman I loved, she stopped existing a long time ago. She became someone else, someone I didn't know." Her eyes filled with tears, silent and genuine this time. I didn't stay to watch her cry. I simply paid for my coffee, left a generous tip, and walked out before my drink got cold, leaving her there with her regrets. I truly thought that was the last time I'd ever see her, but I was wrong, and her final act would haunt me in an unexpected way. A month, perhaps even 6 weeks, after our encounter at the diner, I received a letter from her. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address, just my name handwritten in a careful, almost childlike script. I hesitated before opening it, a sense of dread mingling with morbid curiosity. Inside, the letter was short, handwritten on a single sheet of paper. She said she was sorry, not just for how things ended, but for her actions, for her greed, for believing she could outsmart me. She admitted, in stark, painful honesty, that she thought she was being clever, not cruel, believing she was simply securing her future. She talked about the regret, the loneliness, the realization that her ambition had cost her everything. I read it once, then again, feeling a strange mix of emptiness and a faint echo of the old pain. I didn't respond, because I understood, profoundly, that forgiveness isn't about writing back, isn't about an exchange of words. It's about moving on, truly and completely, without needing the last word, without needing her acknowledgement. And I'd already done that, found that internal peace long before her letter arrived. But her final words, a desperate plea for understanding, lingered in my mind. Words that still haunt me sometimes, a reminder of the destructive power of human avarice. I poured my renewed energy back into work, finding solace and purpose in the familiar rhythms of the construction business. Emily, my daughter, took on an increasingly active role, proving to be even smarter and more capable than I had ever imagined. Together, we not only stabilized the company, but helped it thrive, securing new clients and expanding our reach. My financial advisor, Mark, ensured the trust remained secure and continued to grow. Clients, reassured by the company's stability and my renewed focus, came back in droves, and with them, my peace slowly returned. Sometimes, on my way to a site visit, I'd drive past the old house, the one she'd fought so fiercely to keep, the one that now stood as a silent monument to her failed ambition. The windows were often dark, the once meticulously kept yard now overgrown, a wild tangle of weeds. It looked empty, deserted, fitting, really, because that's what pure, unchecked greed ultimately leaves behind, a barren landscape, an echoing emptiness. Still, even with my new life flourishing, something in me knew, my personal story, the journey of healing and rediscovery, wasn't over yet. There were still parts of me that needed to be rebuilt, not just my business. Friends, noticing the quiet transformation in me, often asked how I managed to stay so calm, so collected, through it all. They expected stories of shouting matches, of fiery confrontations, of vengeful glee. I'd simply tell them, you don't win by shouting. You win by thinking. You win by waiting. At this age, I explained, revenge isn't fire, it's ice. It's the slow, deliberate freeze that leaves your opponent isolated and powerless. It's about patience, about unwavering control over your emotions and your actions. And, most importantly, it's about the quiet, profound satisfaction of knowing you survived the storm intact, stronger than before. I didn't lose half my life to her greed, as she intended. I simply, surgically, removed the part that was rotting, the part that was poisoning everything. What remained was healthier, more resilient, and truly mine. I had shed the illusion of a life, and in doing so, had rediscovered my true self. And for the first time in years, after so much quiet turmoil and calculated maneuvering, I was finally ready to truly live again, to embrace a future unburdened by deceit. One crisp autumn morning, I packed a single bag, just essentials, a few books, and my fishing rod. I left a note for Emily, telling her I needed some time, an open-ended road trip to clear my head. My truck, now fully paid for and legally mine, was humming quietly in the driveway. No destination in mind, just the open road stretching out before me and the comforting silence of a journey undertaken for myself. I drove for hours, the landscapes blurring into a mosaic of golds and browns. I stopped at a quiet rest area overlooking a vast, shimmering lake, watched the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, and realized I hadn't felt this light, this unburdened, in decades. My phone buzzed with a missed call. Her number. I looked at it, then at the rising sun, the vastness of the lake, the endless horizon. A sense of profound peace washed over me, a peace she could never steal. Instead of calling back, instead of even considering it, I simply reached down and turned the phone off completely, letting it rest in the glove compartment, silent and forgotten. Some stories, I concluded, don't need a dramatic ending. They just need a man finally driving toward peace, leaving the past behind him. Because the best revenge is never letting them hear from you again. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, comment, and smash the subscribe button. Also check out other videos on the channel. We've got more interesting stories for you.